Good morning, rock stars, and welcome back to the final day of the 12 days of FMQ FAQ. My name is Holly Ann Knight of String and Story, and it is my job to guide you to quilt with confidence. Today, we are going to be taking a little sneak peek ahead to talk a little bit about quilting plans as we prepare for next week's quilting plan challenge. Before we jump right into that, though, I do just have a couple of reminders. As always, the first link in the caption of this video is a link over to my blog so that you can read more about today's topic. I think this is going to be especially valuable if you are planning on joining us next week for the Quilting Plan Challenge. I want to get a little bit of context of where we're going to be heading, what we're going to be talking about, and why it matters to you. Underneath that, there's a very special invitation to that Quilting Plan Challenge. This is a totally free event that I'm teaching next week, but I have a really cool workbook that I want to email to you. So register with your email address so I can send that straight to your inbox. Finally, underneath that, you're going to see two quick things. One is a reminder to subscribe to this channel to make it easy to find me every time I'm live. And if you've already done that, do please take a moment at the end of our time together to share this video or another video from this series with your quilting friends so we can invite more people into the Quilting Rockstars community. And finally, I added underneath that today a link to the playlist that has all 12 of these videos in it to make it really easy to refer to them again and again. All right. If you are here with me live or on the replay, do say hi. I see Karen, Gail, Shelly, and Madeline are already here, as well as a few others. Good morning, rock stars. Happy Friday. I am so glad to see you, and I'm excited that we have gone through these 12 days together. Now, if you've been tuning in with me for the 12 days of FMQ FAQ, then you have made quite the journey. We started by talking about what machine you need for free motion quilting. Spoiler, the one you already have. We've talked about supplies for free motion quilting, important techniques like basting, a lot about tension and how to adjust your tension so you get beautiful crisp stitches. And then we've gone through this week talking a little bit more about thread, including choosing thread. And today, like I mentioned, we're going to have a little bit of a preview of what we're going to be talking about next week. All right. So, rock stars, as we are doing this, keep saying hi. Good morning, Karen. I saw that you got your kit. Hi, Susie. Hi, Gail. Hi, Kirsten. Hi, Alicia. Oh, it's so good to see all y'all. Darcy's here working on some amazing little projects back. She had to grab the back corners from behind me. All right, let's jump in. Now, as I mentioned, next week, the Quilting Plan Challenge is going to be all about answering the question, what the heck do I quilt wear? So essentially, when your quilt top is done and you've followed the lovely instructions that I gave you last week and you've got it all basted up and you get under your machine and you go, well, now what? How do I decide what motifs I actually want to stitch onto this quilt? And how do I feel confident that it's going to look good, right? If you've done just a tiny bit of free motion quilting, maybe you only have the meander in your back pocket or in your tool chest, and you're like, well, I guess I'm going to do a meander on it, right? That's really common for folks who are new free motion quilters. But it's not long before you get to at least one project that you're like, well, I'd like to do a little something more. Or maybe you've tried to do the meander and you're like, this just isn't working. Like, I need help figuring this out. And if I'm going to bother figuring it out, I want to learn even more than that, right? So, how do we begin to add more skills into our toolbox so that we can really beautifully finish our own quilts? And while I'm going to teach you at the end of next week how you can actually learn each of those motifs and how to stitch them, we have that intermediate step of actually making the decisions of what to stitch where. Now, a quilting plan is typically a drawing, right? So instead of starting to pick motifs at random and putting them on your quilt and then being like, well, shoot, I don't like it. Now I have to unpick it. Truly, I can't tell you how many stories like that I've heard, right? Of rock stars who have shared with me that they didn't know what a quilting plan was. They didn't know how to make one. They thought they were just supposed to jump in, right? And they started quilting only to realize kind of too late, oh, I don't like the motif that I chose. I don't like how this looks. And now I need to go back and unpick it. And more often than not, that project ends up shoved in the back of a closet and it never gets finished, right? And I'm here to help you feel more confident actually finishing those quilts. I want to get your quilts over the finish line to being usable quilts. And one of the things we're going to talk a lot about next week is I don't think that there's very many ways to mess up a quilt. In fact, I would argue that really the only way, perhaps, is to let a beautiful quilt top stay only a quilt top so that your hard work and your beautiful creativity never get to be enjoyed by the people you love. All right. So I want you to be able to quilt those up. Now, as I mentioned, a quilting plan is most often a drawing. It's a lot easier to make decisions on paper than it is to make them on our quilt itself. So next week, we're going to do a lot of talking through what are the different ways that I can draw this and what is the function of that drawing. right? Being able to draw out ideas for how you want to quilt your quilt allows you to audition different plans, right? It allows you to have a reference as you're quilting. And it's really handy if later you want to do it again and maybe you gave the quilt away, you can refer back to that quilting plan if you want to do something similar in the future. All right. I want you to think of a quilting plan and the process of making a quilting plan a little bit like planning a road trip. All right. So a few years back, we went out, actually, just a couple of years now. Yeah, 2020, summer 2020, we went out to Yellowstone. Okay. And we, of course, flew out. We flew into Utah, and then we had to drive up from Utah into Idaho, and then we were driving from Idaho into the parks, right? And planning a trip like that takes a lot of coordination. You got to think about flight times, and then you got to think about car rentals. And then once we got in the car, even though we knew, okay, we're going to Idaho, we had to make decisions about where do we want to stop along the way? Which road do we want to take? Once we're staying in Idaho, when we're driving into Yellowstone each day, which gate do we want to enter? Which route do we want to take? Right? And every single day there's that series of decisions, but sitting down ahead of time and kind of planning that itinerary makes the trip itself a lot more enjoyable, right? We sat down and we said, okay, we're going to drive from this point, in Utah up to this point in Idaho. When we arrive, we're going to take this side trip. All right. And then each day as we're driving in, these 2 days, we're going to drive into the west gate of Yellowstone. This other day, we're going to drive into the Grand Tetons. And we kind of had those things planned out, and it gave us some framework. And, we didn't have to have every exact tiny little thing planned down to the minute, but we needed to have a big picture of where we were going, right? And I want you to think of your quilting plan really similarly, that next week is all about me teaching you the skills to plan a successful quilting road trip. All right. Now, before we head into 5 whole days of this, part of the reason I wanted to give you all this little preview today is I suspect that there could be some of you who are like, is this challenge for me? Or will this challenge teach me this particular thing? Or here's this burning question I have before I can even feel fully excited about the challenge, right? So I wanted to give y'all an opportunity to ask questions about the challenge. But also, if you already have foundational questions about quilting plans, I'm here to answer those. All right. Heading into the challenge, all you really need is that workbook that I email out. And I would recommend picking out a quilt top or two that is really special to you, that it would be really meaningful to get to quilt it yourself. Okay. All right, let's see. Madeline says, I love the itinerary model because who knows when you'll run into bad weather or traffic or whatever while traveling and you need to adjust on the fly. Yes, Madeline, exactly. One of the examples we'll look at next week actually is this quilt. So this is Lanterns of Hope, and this particular Lanterns of Hope was pieced as part of a color competition with Paintbrush Studio Fabrics. But then after it was quilted, it hung at QuiltCon 2020. And that was the job of this quilt, right? Like this was going to be a show quilt. And so I wanted to do the most on the quilting. But on the quilting plan, this circle here, and I don't know how well y'all will be able to see this on the camera, but I had actually planned to quilt a full grid in this circle. And then in every other section of the grid, I was going to do switchbacks to create this like cool kind of basket weave pattern. And you'll see that in the quilting plan next week. And that's not how I ended up quilting it. Because by the time I got it on the long arm and started trying to execute, my lines got distorted and I had to pivot. Right. And so that's the really cool thing is we're able to create these models, these itineraries, and they don't have to be rigid. They can be fluid, right? We can see like next exit quilt shop and like take a hard left because that's what we do, but it also allows us to have enough of an idea that if we're quilting along and we need to take a break, when we get back, we can pick up right where we left off. Yep. Sharon says, well, I was in the last cohort. As I'm grading, I'm listening to you. Oh, Sharon, I'm so glad you're here. Wonderful, wonderful. I'm very excited about the challenge as well, by the way, Retta. And Evelise, I'm so glad you're here. I'm glad you made it live. Brilliant. Brenda at the beach. I love your handle here on YouTube. That's fantastic. I love that energy. I love that energy. And I'm glad you made it live. I love that. All right, let me think. What other questions you may have for next week? So a quilting plan matters because it's going to give you peace of mind to successfully finish your own quilts. All right. A quilting plan is a lot like an itinerary for a road trip. It is not set in stone. It is not something that has to be final or that you can never vary from, but it is going to create a guide so that you can really enjoy the process of finishing your quilts, right? Planning and quilting are two different parts of our brain, right? For the planning process, we really need our analytical brain. For the quilting process, we need our much more creative, kind of embodied brain as we're moving that quilt around. And separating those things is going to reduce fatigue and reduce overwhelm on our system. Okay. Let's see. Madeline says, question, am I going to need a lot of practice sandwiches? What do you do with your practice sandwiches when they're full? Ooh, Madeline, this is a great question. So after we have the Quilting Plan Challenge next week, many of you already know we are heading towards the 10th cohort of Free Motion Quilting Academy. And if you are not already in Free Motion Quilting Academy, I would love for you to join me at the end of next week. And so as part of that, yes, you'll need a lot of practice sandwiches in order to learn the over 30 motifs I'll be teaching inside that class. And as far as what to do when they're full, there's a couple of things. So one that I wrote about recently on the blog, you can make cute little zippy pouches like this, right? So you just add a little liner. This is literally a tutorial on my blog, Madeline. So this is a fun one. You add a liner, you add a zipper, and you can make cute little zippy pouches. You could also trim them into rectangles, and you could bind them to make placemats. You could trim them into rectangles and donate them. Well, and I would bind them, and then you could donate them to your local pet shelter. They make really great pet like pet pads because they're easily washable and all of that. What else have I seen rock stars make with them? A couple of rock stars made tote bags one year, which was really cool. You could make a sewing machine cover. All that to say, there's a lot of options, and I would think through. I think you're very smart to be thinking ahead and thinking through, like, what am I going to want to do with these on the other side? Because you may want to adjust the size of practice sandwich that you use based on if you're planning on cutting something out of it later. The other thing I've seen rock stars do is they will cut like a 10 by 10 inch square out of a practice sandwich of each of the motifs they learn, and then toss a D-ring through the corner and make like a little flip book of all the different motifs that they could use on their quilts. And they'll use that during the quilt plan process later on as almost like a toolbox or a paint box of different things that they can pick and choose from. So awesome, awesome, awesome question. Any last questions, y'all? Today was very quick, a quick overview. Quilting plans are for everyone. Whether you think that you're someone who only wants to do all over designs on your quilts or you want to do the most custom quilting, if you're finishing your own quilts, having the skill of making a quilting plan is super important. It doesn't matter what machine you're on. It doesn't matter how big or small the quilt is. It doesn't matter right now how much experience you have free motion quilting. Even if you've never tried to meander, if you've got that kind of little burning in your soul of, I really want to be able to do my quilts start to finish, including the quilting process, then this challenge is for you, okay? Susie says, dating those practice sandwiches too. Yes, that's super fun, especially when you're doing multiples of the same motif. Marking down the date so you can see your improvement over time. I love that, Susie. That's a good reminder. Love it. What was the other thing I was going to share? There was one more. Oh, I shared this example recently of if you are someone who thinks that you only want to do all over motifs on your quilt, like why does a quilting plan matter for you, right? Bless you. That was quite the sneeze. My goodness. A quilting plan matters even if you are just going to use a single motif because it allows you, one, to play with scale and think about how big or small you want those motifs to be. It also allows you to think through if there are any areas of your quilt that you want to be really mindful of your quilting placement, right? So I gave the example of a t-shirt quilt, and if you've got 20 t-shirts cut out and sashed in a border and you're quilting it, and one of those t-shirts has Bob Ross's face on the front of it, right? How you quilt over that is probably going to be a little bit more intentional so that Bob Ross doesn't end up looking all warty, right? Like you want to be mindful. Yep. All right, Karen says, I have been drawing stars because I have a flag top. Oh, Karen, that's a great idea. I love that. Yeah, good star meander. What a fun one. All right, rock stars, as a quick review, you can read ahead for next week in two ways. One is by clicking the link to visit my blog for an introductory post all about quilting plans, and you can kind of see some of the material we'll be covering next week. You can also make sure you're registered for the Quilting Plan Challenge and read ahead by actually getting that workbook downloaded, printed, and be ready to take notes. After that, you can review all of the videos from this 12 days of FMQ FAQ in the playlist I've put together for us. I hope that this has been encouraging and fun for you. And if you started this month curious about free motion quilting, but with a lot of anxiety, I hope you have been encouraged and uplifted to continue on this journey to figure out how to finish your own quilts and know how to do that with confidence and do it within this amazing community. Last but not least, if you have not already subscribed to my channel, please do so. And if you've already done that, do me a favor when we're done with this video and go ahead and copy that playlist link and share it with your quilting pals and your quilting Facebook groups on your social media, and invite more quilting friends to come join the Quilting Rockstars community and the Quilting Plan Challenge. Y'all have been absolutely amazing these last 12 days. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for allowing me the privilege of being your teacher during these videos. I look forward to seeing y'all next week for day 1 of our challenge. Big love, Rockstars. I will see you next week.